How you doing? My name is George, and welcome to the Northeast RC Racer Podcast. I am here with my counterparts, Toby Hampson,
What's up?
Tom Petrella,
What's up?
and Vin Manchenda.
How's it going?
We're so excited to be back. It's been an awesome summer, a lot of racing going on in the region. So it's been awesome to be able to follow the racers. And I know Toby with 46 RC Media, he's definitely been doing overtime, following the races, and doing a great job. We want to, first of all, thank Drew Singer for coming and participating. Nitro Pro, our last episode, which is episode 20. Thank you, Drew, for participating. It was an awesome podcast. And we got to learn a lot about your servo line, your fuels, and some of the other accessory products that you make. Am I missing anything else, guys, other than those three things? Ben?
Just a lot of good stuff throughout the whole thing, right? I missed that one, the beginning of it, so I was happy to go back and watch that one. So if you guys haven't watched that one, go back and watch it. I know Vin's going to tell you guys to subscribe anyway, so you get notifications, but it was a good one.
Cool.
Just want to make sure we were covering all those bases. So it was really great to have him on, and a lot of good exposure for the brand, as well as getting people familiar with the awesome warranty policy that he has. So check him out if you haven't seen him. But again, thank you, Drew, for your participation. We also recently had a race event that our podcast held, and we're going to throw it over to Tom Petrella quickly because we have an awesome guest in the waiting room that we want to bring in and not hold them up at all. I think you guys are going to be real excited to see who comes in. So I'll leave the suspense hanging for another minute. Take it off, Tom.
Yeah, so Northeast RC Racer Podcast. I have so struggled with our acronym. We got to come up with something shorter. But, thanks to the podcast, came out and sponsored an event down at Rhythm. I was excited to have everybody. We had some people travel pretty far. Had definitely a lot of the fast guys there. We ended up having 108 entries, which was amazing. That's the highest entry count we've had by far. So that was really, really cool. It was a good vibe all day. Track did really well. I wish we had some rain ahead of time. We haven't had rain down here in over a month. It's crazy.
Same, man.
So it's been a battle trying to keep the track together and keep everything right. But all things considering, it was really good. We got to run a bunch of different classes. Thank you, George, and the podcast for the awards. I think everybody really enjoyed those. But some really awesome racing action. I'll go down some of the podium stuff real quick with some of our different racers. In the 1A scale e-buggy class, Zach Sinclair took the win with the Kyosho. Zach's a local racer here, kind of just getting back into it, and probably somebody good to have on a podcast in the future. You know, him and his dad have been racing for a long time. I think I saw something I posted up like last time he raced 1A scale outdoor was like he was 15 years old. Came to LCRs this weekend and finished on the podium in Nitro Buggy, which is pretty impressive. But Zach took the one. Dan Ross, TLR driver, with the 2, and Colton Fenari finished up in the 3rd spot. We'll come back to Colton in a minute because he had a pretty good battle with Jamie Gregg later on. I'm just going to kind of go through the order on live RC here. 1A scale Truggy, Greg Harmer came out. That's the only class he ran. Pretty much dominated with it. But Benny kept him pretty honest for 2/3 of the race. Benny Comerian's been flying out there. So Benny took the 2 spot, Mark Kimley in the 3. I wanted to see Mark do well just because Mark's running a full Truggy body, not a bruggy body. So it's good to see the full buggy or the Truggy body. 1A scale Nitro Buggy. That was a really good epic battle, 20-minute race. Jamie Gregg and Colton going back and forth. And as they would get into it, Zach would catch back up and Zach would lead for a while. The 3 of those guys swapped the lead a bunch of different times throughout the race. So that was really, really good racing to see those 3 out there. And I think Jamie is uncle by friendship to Colton. So it was kind of cool to see. They had a good battle back and forth. 40 plus e-buggy. Rob Pierce took the win on that one. That was a good battle. Mark Kimley in the 2, Ophir in the 3. A lot of fast guys there again, so really good to see, and a lot of good battles. 40 plus Nitro Buggy, Jamie Gregg won that one. Tom Stober was in the house, so 2 guys that have been had flying around. Stober did really well. He struck in the Nitro Buggy race. He flamed out. Unfortunately, I think he would have been up there with those guys as well. And Bob Capabianco finishing the 3rd spot. Just switched over to AE from Kyosho. He's really digging the cars and did really, really well with him. So happy to see that. And last but not, two more. Nitro Truggy, Ophir took the win on that one. Him and Kevin Winters were going back with. Kevin was flying, really. Trying to recall exactly what happened to him, but he fell back a little bit. Ended up finishing back about 15 seconds from Ophir, but Kevin looked really good out there. And Arturo Ruiz. Arturo he's always on point. His equipment runs every time. I've never seen him flame out. I'm probably going to jinx him, so I'll knock wood for him here. But Arturo did really, really well as well. Got to give a shout out to Dennis Brewer from Nitro Caddy as well. He donated his stuff. He actually finished 4th in the Nitro Truggy class. So good job on Dennis. And lastly, our novice. I hope I pronounce it right. I always get it backwards. Edu Kamirian. So that's Ophir's oldest son. Benny's older brother came out and raced, did really well, ran a Truggy. AJ Foster finished 2 and Corey Kimball in the 3. So it was a good weekend altogether. I want to again thank the podcast. I got to thank EB Mods, you Toby 46RC, your sponsorship along the way. Nitro Pro helped us out. They gave a servo to the winner of the novice class, which was kind of cool. It was a nice little incentive for the novice drivers. VP hooked us up. So we had a lot of good stuff. Got to thank Matt Navoso again at position 1. He was our first sponsor. So a really good event all overall. We kind of got in. We got 2 rounds in. George, we were out of there by what? 5:30, 6 o'clock?
6 o'clock with awards.
Yeah, it was awesome.
Dennis Brew, thank you very much for donating the Nitro Caddy. And we also had a great 50-50. There was big said $200 pot, $400 pot, and winner got $200. So that was great. Of course, the winner was Dennis Brew. So it worked out karma-wise, donation, and a little bit of money back to Dennis for the donation. So nonetheless, check out Nitro Caddy. It's a really awesome product. If you're a Nitro user, carry your stuff easily from the pits over the racetrack. And I think it'll be a great addition to your toolbox. I'm not in Nitro, but if I was, I'd be rocking the Nitro Caddy. That's for sure.
It's pretty
Yeah, it is, Ben, right? You guys use it yet?
Yeah, we've checked it out. I've used it with other people, but we actually don't have one ourselves, Dennis. So talk to you soon, Dennis. Wink.
All right, real quick, because we got to keep moving. We don't want to keep our guests waiting much longer. Toby, do you have any things to fill in for LCRC?
Yeah, I'll keep it super quick. Obviously cancer race this past weekend. Long-standing event. I think originally was not at LCRC. Tom, do you know where it was by any chance?
It was somewhere out towards Pittsburgh. I forget what track it was at, if the track's even there anymore, but I never.
Yeah. So it came to LCRC, like 5-6 years ago, something like that. And now Kevin and Chris are taking it over kind of as their event and put their own twist on it. Awesome donations from the industry and just people in the community, lots of cool prizes. I ended up going home with like this really bizarre basket of salami and stuff and a bottle of quail eggs, which was absolutely bizarre. So my son seems to like, and I haven't gone there yet. I won a kit and
What kind of kit?
An AE1.
Yeah.
You'll see the waffle in a week.
Yeah, right. Right. So 287 entries. Great event, raised $26,145 for St. Jude's. So
I
yeah, a lot of fun.
By the way, Toby, last year they only raised 17,000. So
yeah, I mean, I heard that
the racers that came out, and that was awesome. It's fun racing, but it feels good to do good. So
yeah, I heard that they approached. She had some of her friends approach sponsors, and they had approached the local. I think it was either somebody in kind of the building industry or somebody in the building industry, and they laid down $8,000 before they'd even started, or something, or $5,000. So before they even started the event, they had like $8,000. So it's pretty impressive.
That's awesome.
Touch on the racing super quick. The most eventful race was the last race, which was electric buggy. There was some awesome drama, which I wasn't really aware of until my buddy Taylor ran up to the broadcast booth. But I don't want to talk names. There was a driver who is known for hacked another driver, and the driver, the hacky,
Hacky.
the hacky, then chased him down the track and tried to take him out. I was pretty awesome. So there was some words spoken, and a little fun drama to the end of the day. So Ethan Mechanic, Take It Down, Expert Buggy, Schreffler, and Aiden. Aiden again on the podium. Expert Nitro Buggy, Mechanic, TQ basically went from tone to tone. Harmo and Schreffler top three. Ciccarello, Zachary Sinclair in fifth. E-Truggy, always a big class. Aiden taking it down. Mike Spranza. Yeah, there we go. And Kaufman. 1, 2, 3. Nitro Truggy, Brian Cruz. Nick Camusco is getting faster and faster. Was your TQ, ended up second, and it's proved third. And of course, 40 plus Nitro, which I featured in, which was quite rare. Scott Del Castro was a much loved racer, taking the TQ, but what I understand, he flamed out like on the last lap. And Anthony Bartholomew, regional racer, took the win with Petrella in third. So I was interested into that race. And I guess 40 plus electric buggy, of which Ciccarello, Aaron Buran, and Don Hill have taken down the top three. So that's really what happened. A great event. So well attended. Yeah. So I think we should get on with bringing that guest in, right, Tom, George?
Absolutely. So no more waiting. We have Jason Rouna. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, from J Concepts.
Let's bring him in. There he is.
There he is.
How you doing, Jason?
The guy, Jason.
Good. How you doing?
We're
Doing
doing
great.
awesome.
Thank you.
How's the audio on my side? Is it okay?
Yep.
Sounds great. So Toby and I would like to say, as well as the entire group, thank you so much for participating in our podcast.
For sure.
You are definitely a pioneer in the hobby. You're a legend, to say the least, and we're so gracious to have somebody of your caliber on the show. So thank you very much.
I mean, yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, obviously, you guys, I think, doing this stuff. I mean, I've done, a lot of podcasts over time, and this is not easy to keep this stuff going, and to schedule them and to keep up the consistency. But I think there's good content out there. I think, obviously, with a collection of experience you have here, you get a lot of good information for everybody, and it gives everybody stuff to listen to. And I kind of listened in a little bit with what you guys recapping some races and events, and obviously Toby being at LCRC, and then Tom had some event stuff he was talking about, and so yeah, I mean, I appreciate you guys.
Awesome.
That's awesome. That's very much appreciated. And, that's part of the main reason, we started doing this was, number one, to kind of memorialize, great racers in our area, whether they're older guys now about leaving the hobby or guys that just come visit, current fast guys, and, the local Joes. So between that and, trying to provide the race coverage, especially for, let's say, top 5 in the local categories, we want racers to feel appreciated for racing, right? And to be able to cover the great stories. So I think that's kind of the overall message that we're bringing, as well as Vin's setup segment, Tom's analysis, and some other parts that he brings to the table. And then, of course, Toby doing race recaps, and me trying to fill in some interviews at the same time. So I think, we're trying to do good for the hobby, paying it forward.
Yeah, I mean, there's more and more information out there, and I think it's kind of building to where it creates more interest too. These events, the ups and downs, and people like to follow what's going on at these events, and especially if they're involved, right? Like, I think people are like, yeah, I was at that event, and it's nice to check in and hear a little bit about it from somebody else's perspective, and yeah, I like that side of it.
Very cool. Thank you. As I always, trying to create a little bit of a format, some questions for you, right? Of course, I try to do research on every main person that we bring into interview. So, your history goes quite extensive. I think starting from 2001, right? You were a racer. You were working on some chassis at the time. You had developed your own custom body, I think the Illusion. So, and then you had this migration into owning your own company. One thing I didn't want to do was go down that whole road that I found I would see multiple times as I did research on yourself. So I figured the best thing that we could do for our listeners was engage with you with basically a discussion about how your knowledge and your products and the people that you've met can help not only the local Joe, but maybe the local fast guy, at our tracks. So that's kind of the angle that we're coming to you with tonight. So hopefully you don't mind a little bit of question and answer period.
No, I think that's good. I started racing in '91. Was the first time I actually raced was '91. I had cars before that I raced in my backyard, but we started J Concepts. We always say is 2003. Tom's, he's got the 20th anniversary shirt on there, which was from last year. So we started in 2003 with the body, the Illusion body, and the BJ4 car. We ran a 4-wheel drive car, and we've just been moving since then.
Quite the progression you've had.
Yeah, it goes by quick. The first couple of years is, it's difficult, and kind of have to find your place, and you kind of have to find, where everything fits in, and there's a lot to learn in the business of RC, and there's a lot to learn at the races, and I'm thankful that I had started early in racing and raced a lot of events, and did well as a racer to know kind of that end of things a little bit, and was able to test some of our own products when we first started. So it wasn't like starting from scratch or having to give something to somebody. I could personally drive it at that time and kind of cut down on some of the the additional time there would be to do some testing and stuff. So I was able to do that pretty early on, and that helped a lot. And then the relationships with the drivers, the people, and knowing what it's like to be a driver and a racer. But then also you kind of have to transition to being in a business, and it's different than racing. And some people learn that early. Some people take a long time to learn that in the business, but it's difficult.
Jason, one of the questions I had for you later, George, I hope you don't mind me just jumping in.
No.
You talk about the development of the product, right? And you think about J Concept, they've got an amazing group of drivers. How does that development change now? When you used to do it yourself, right now you have a team of amazing drivers which are helping develop the product. Can you talk about how that process works? And
well, I think it was easier I think when we started, really, because there was really only one or two opinions that mattered, because it was either me at the beginning trying to satisfy myself and racing against my peers, but then when we got kind of Ryan into the fold, we had racers like JR Mitch, Paul Wynn, that were so good racing with us at the beginning too. But kind of Brian in the fold, was different. Now it wasn't. That's pretty much when I would consider that I really stopped. I've raced a long time, and I still do a little bit of racing, but almost at that time you kind of have to decide you're really not racing anymore, because you're really it's really about somebody else's results now, and somebody that can do it better than you at a higher level. You kind of have to just decide, all right, the best thing that I can do is help this person do well. And that's what we did. And, we concentrated on Ryan and his results. We tried to do the best that we could for him. We tried to provide him with, what was needed. And, there's times that we did, there's times where we didn't, and we got better along the way. And I think the difficult part about this that I think is also difficult for people to understand sometimes is these tracks are, especially outdoor tracks, they're always evolving. And so when you want to even test something, you can go out to, say, LCRC, for instance. Toby was just there. I was just there at the Mugen race. Obviously Ryan was there too. And these tracks are always different. And you could go out and you can test and you can drive, just say it's tires or whatever you want to run. And it can go really pretty well. If you're just out there by yourself, you're just trying to drive some things, you're taking some lap times, doing some small testing on your own. But it's when you get into the competition is when it really changes, because that's when you really see either the true performance or you see what happens when the competition is racing with you at the exact same time. And lots of times these drivers, no matter what skill level they are, whether it was me or it's a Ryan or a Dakota, or now like at the Worlds, Juan Carlos Canas, but it doesn't matter what they're very, everyone's very affected by how well they did, not how well the product did. So trying to put aside how you did personally, that test session, that run, that qualifier, that main event, putting that in perspective with how the product actually performed. And the better the driver you are, the more it's about how did I do when I used it. And for people that have a really high standard, a la, the Mayfields, the Dakotas, their opinion is it's tough for them to run poorly and evaluate the product perfectly, because they want to see a good result that goes along with the performance of the product. So now I think that's the most difficult part with all of this testing, running, whether you're developing a product or you're developing a car. The track is always changing. It's always evolving. It's important to be in back-to-back scenarios, whether you're going to try something now and then you want to get back on the track very quickly after that, because the track changes. Obviously, Toby, he sees the track go through many, changes. You're there at LCRC, and it's particularly these days outdoors, and that's where my racing comes from, is outdoor racing. You see a lot more of these changes in the track because of the weather, really. It's the sun, it's, if you have any moisture, all these type of things. So evaluating these products alongside of the great drivers, it sounds really, I guess, either easy, but sometimes it's not, because it also has to perform well for them in terms of results. So if they go out and drive something and they feel like, I could be watching thinking, oh man, this looks really good, but they didn't have the run or the qualifier or the main event that they were looking for, and it might not get 5 stars, right? It might get 3 stars. So that's the difficult part. But I think that's where kind of coming back and either doing it again or another set of conditions or circumstances on the track, I think is pretty valuable. But what I've always said about Ryan is he shows you what the limits kind of are. So if he's going to run, and drive very aggressively, you're going to see what kind of, duress the product is under. So it's like if you're worried about something, the durability, or you're worried about something, having a failure with something, or he's going to show you that it's going to show up because they're putting a lot of, pressure on the product's performance. And I think that's what's been good over the years is you get that feedback from these drivers. And then I think when it all comes together is when you see a great performance or a great qualifier or a main event, and then you look at the product afterwards and you say, you know what, this was a good match. You could see the driver has the result they're looking for. You could see that they didn't make a lot of mistakes. They kept, their consistency level was at a point where they were happy with it. And then you look at the product when it's finished and you said, you know what, I can see some success. I can see why it was successful for them. And I think, so putting all that together, I think is really what makes it work. I think you just don't get, say in the old days, you don't just really get a Brian Kinwald or one of these Ryan Mayfield or a Dakota. You don't really just get a racer and they turn everything magically into either a winner or into a good product. I think it's a combination of the people that are working with them, whether, Paul is a guy that goes to a lot of races for us here on the East Coast. And whether you're talking with Paul or you're, talking with me or, whoever it is that we're helping with at the time. But it's a combination of those things that really brings out the best, and the driver can put it through the paces, and then you'll learn something in the end. We learned stuff at the Worlds. We went in with a certain idea of what we wanted to do. In the end, we destroyed product in the mains, and we had weather change. We had different things happen, and we learned some things, and we had some success too. But it's a combination of those drivers being in a position where they can run a 60-minute main event, or the weather changes and gets warm, the sun comes out. All these things happen to these tracks, and you have to be able to realize and notice these little changes, I think. Whereas I think sometimes people have a habit of, they'll get to a track early in the morning and they'll say, yeah, I put on this tire and it didn't work, and they never want to run those again. It's like, well, you might have ran it at the wrong time, so it's like you have to know that you can't be afraid to go back to something that is going to be the right thing at a certain time. Just because you ran it in the morning or whenever you got there and it wasn't great, that doesn't mean it's not going to work later when the track is different. So it's getting a lot of those type of things organized, and understanding those things, I think, is what really brings out the results and the driver.
We're I think gonna go like round robin here. So Vin, you want to tap off a question?
Sure. One of the questions I wanted to ask was, what do you look for in a driver?
I mean, there's a lot of different things, I think. I guess when there's some people that are valuable as a racer because they have outright speed, right? And there's not really a lot of things you can do to teach outright speed or just that they're a fantastic racer. And like it or not, in everything, they do watch and they are attracted to these racers that can put up these results and great lap times. And so there's some racers and individuals that are standouts because they have that capability to drive the equipment and make it look good. Then there's individuals who are good with the equipment. They know how to build it. They know how to maintain it. They know how to present it properly. It looks good. It looks the part. And then they can explain to others how it's supposed to be done. And I think that's a valuable asset. And then there's some racers or individuals who are just good with people, I guess. They just like the hobby, they like the business, they like it, and they want to, consistently try to influence people to either be involved or be involved with the product that they represent. So, and then there's the people or the racers that are just, it's almost like they're more into it socially than they are into it at the track. And, and that has some value too. That would probably be the lines of people that are, doing these kind of things, podcasts, or they're doing like, videos, or they have their own channels, or, YouTube or whatever. So it all has kind of a different value, I think. So I think when you're evaluating today, those are a lot of the things that you have to evaluate is, in my day racing in the early 90s, it was difficult to be a sponsored driver, or it was difficult to get on these teams because we didn't have the level of communication either. You couldn't really just hit somebody up on Facebook, or, it was very difficult. You knew people's names, but you didn't, it was difficult to see them, difficult to get in touch with them. You couldn't email anybody. It's like you're writing a letter, you're trying to call somebody, and it's like, so you really had to do something to be noticed in those days. So you had to perform well at events where people were present that could make those kind of decisions, and they would come up to you a lot of times and tell you whether you're on the right path or not, or or you had to go say, hey, can you watch me race? Right? And let me know what you think. And I mean, I had that happen at LCRC. I had a kid come say, hey, come watch me race. And, and you go and watch. And it's actually kind of fun in a sense. Like, it is kind of a little bit refreshing, because it's like, people don't necessarily do that anymore. But in the older days, that's the kind of how you had to be noticed. You kind of had to stick your nose in there a little bit and say, hey, come check me out. And so, that's kind of how it was done in the old days, is you had to perform, you had to do well on the track. That's how you got representation or sponsors back then, because you could get it done. And the social side of it and all that was kind of like it wasn't easy to monitor, or what you just hoped as the person that you were helping out in those days became good at all the other parts of what made a good representative. And you just hope that a good racer turned into all these other things. And today they're almost different people. There's some people that have it all together, right? But it might be more of a business to them. You have the Ryan Lutzes who, he's got an active, he's, doing videos on YouTube. Spencer Rivkin, he's got his videos, but, but they also have top caliber results too. So it's a kind of rare that you have the best talented guys with the best results also doing everything. But you certainly hope that people do take a liking to those things. But it almost seems like today there's, you kind of specialize in a couple of them. You don't really specialize. You don't get the person all the time that can do them all, but you try to have people that are good at a couple of them, and then that's where they can concentrate in those areas where they feel that they're the best at. And to me, that's what we have to look at as who you're sponsoring and who you're trying to be involved with are these individuals who have one of or all of those attributes. And I think that's what can really make the difference. And it's hard. It's really hard you might miss out on the greatest racer, the greatest person, because it just something didn't fall together. And then you might end up with the best relationship out of a situation that accidentally comes together. So you just certainly kind of hope that you don't miss out on, more than you get, I guess. So I think that's really the bottom line is those are the different avenues today that we see and that you kind of work with. And that's why you see a lot more sponsored drivers these days. That's why, not to go down that road, but there is a lot, different reasons for that. But, compared to the old days, and when I started, that's probably some of the differences is that we see today.
Well put, really well put. And breaking it down into 4 different levels is great. I actually took some notes here for myself. I couldn't agree with you more. Yeah, we didn't have the marketing that we have now, the internet and the email and everything else. And it makes a big difference.
Yeah, when I was a kid and I raced for Associated and Reedy, and there would be, there's people that I would say, hey, if you want to get an Associated car, I'll build it. You can come to my house. I'll, help you build it. You can build it and I'll watch, or, whatever you want. And we can go to the track. I can run. I can show you what it's supposed to look like. And then, when I remember we used to go to the Georgia State Championships all the time. And I know back when, Mike Reedy used to, he would, usually give away, if he had a good driver that won the event, lots of times they'd give away the motor at the end of the race. And there was lots of times we did that at the Georgia States. We'd give away, your Reedy motor straight out of the car. And there's people that have come up to me and say, I still have your motor from the Georgia States in like 1995 or whatever. You know what I mean? It's like they still have it. And I think, and that's how it was done back then. Today you might get a prize on a podcast, or you might, so there's those kinds of different things, but that's how it was kind of done back then. But there was also some good things about that. I think it was really kind of valid. I won Jay Halsey's truck at the Winter Champs when the first time I ever went. I won they had a big, a giveaway for his TQ truck, and I won that truck. And it probably changed everything for me. The fact that I kind of had this connection in a weird way with Jay Halsey that early when I started, and I won his truck. And when I see him today, we still talk about this truck that I won. And I was probably racing for like 3 or 4 months at the time, so a lot of these things, it kind of can either keep you involved in this. It's sort of a motivation, or it's kind of like winning early, like I won something, or I was, there are some little hidden gems out there, I think, that really kind of contribute to racers sticking around in this, feeling like they're accomplishing something or winning something, or yeah, those are very cool moments.
Awesome.
Toby, do you have anything lined up for a question?
Yeah. So after Worlds, or during Worlds, I'd written a little blog post about it. Had things going around in my head, but do you think? Obviously, I listened to some of your opinions on Radio Impound podcast on regards to RCGP. Do you feel? I don't know if you want to get into it. Do you feel like to be a world's winner that it should be multiple events rather than just the one? You know what I mean? Because this past worlds was such an extreme difference, and it was clearly a differentiator between the different style tracks, different style drivers. Do you think it would be a better, more fairer thing if it was like a 4-race series that we kind of evolved into, where there was two European races and 2 US races kind of thing?
I think there's a lot of different, I think, aspects to that idea. And I think if you just had, if these guys only had to go to 5 races in a year, I think it would be fine to have a, quote unquote World Series where maybe there was only 5 events that they went to for the whole year. I think the issue comes in where if you really look at this stuff and you kind of remove the just who the world champion or who the best is from the whole thing, that we have a ton of events that really carry almost the same amount of value or more than Worlds because of the relationship that you can have or with the race or the track or the racers. And I think, like, you take, for instance, it's very possible that there is just as much to gain for a company. Let's just say it's Techno, right? That they send, like a Mayfield or whoever to the Mugen race and do a race there. It could be argued that it was more beneficial to them to send to that race and run the Mugen Challenge than it was for him to send him to the Worlds, because he really went to the Worlds and it didn't really go that well for him for really the first time ever, to be honest. I mean, he's running 8 of them now, 8 Worlds for 8 scale, and he's probably, throughout that span, I would say either him or Robert Battle are probably the 2 most successful guys from 2008 till now. A lot of people came in much later. So, but I mean, he was in the lead in 2008, and so he has a lot of Worlds experience. But it could be argued that it was a better decision for Techno to send him to, say, the Mugen Challenge or a Race Time Entertainment race where you have 800 or 900 entries. For the bottom line for them, they might actually get more out of it for a racer like that to be at one of those other events than for them to be at the Worlds. And I think that's the 2 different sides, I think, that we're dealing with when people talk about having some type of a World Cup, World Series, multiple race event, where I think when you're going there and you're doing those events, it's really only for the win. You're going there to just be the world champion or the top dog, or try to win, whether it's for yourself or for the company or for the brands that you represent. But there's kind of like it's 2 different things. I think there's what makes sense for the company to do these races where you have an impact for a greater amount of people versus just going and doing an event that's really just has an impact in terms of who's the best driver ranking wise in the world. And I think what I've thought over the years is you're better off, like if you're just for the company, you're better off doing more events where you can reach more people and have a better overall exposure to different individuals. And in person, doing these things in person, I think they're better for the company versus just this quick hit of winning, the top event, and then, or a series of events and being done. So I think that's a couple things. So, and I don't think, I think that like having just one world, I mean, that's where I've always kind of, I was grown up that way, that in RC, that there was only one world championship every 2 years. You got your ducks in a row. You went there, you see what would happen. If you won, you won. If you didn't, you didn't. And then your next shot was 2 more years. And so I'm kind of used to that formula, though I think it really creates a situation where you know who the best guy is in the world. Maybe there is some flaws there because sure, you can have a condition that's more suited to one guy versus another. Maybe I think the biggest concern is that the track or the conditions are too similar to when everybody has been there. And then some people have more experience there than others. So it's a little bit skewed at times, because I think somebody could have much more experience at a certain location, but I don't think that necessarily determines how great of a driver they are. Like, to me, the fact that, do I feel that whether it's Ryan Mayfield or Ryan Lutz, I think Ryan Lutz started in the 8th final and he was trying to bump to the quarters, I think. Do I feel like he's better than a top 60 driver in the world? For sure. Like, he's definitely, to me, a much better, he's probably at least inside of the top 30, maybe inside the top 15. I mean, but you go to a track and a race like that, things are skewed because there's other drivers that are less experienced overall, but more experienced in that condition. So things are a little different. So if you had just changed that event and you put everybody back at LCRC and you had that race right back all over again at LCRC, like the Mugen Challenge, which, Lutz did so well out there, would he have been 60th? No way, right? Like, he wouldn't have been 60th. Would Ungaro still have won? I don't know, maybe, but we don't necessarily know that. But I can tell you that, Lutz and Mayfield and these guys would have been a lot higher than where they were. And so, yeah, you do get a little bit of home cooking at some of these events. But I think when I was racing, I always kind of felt like maybe the next one will be more towards my liking, maybe it'll be more where I'm accustomed to racing or driving. And that did happen to me. There was times that it was better for me than others. And you could tell right away when you're there, when you're driving and practicing, you're thinking, all right, this is a little more of what I'm accustomed to. So yeah, I think to really establish who that world's best guy is, I'm sure it would be a little more clear if you had more conditions over more races. But in terms of your bang for your buck and trying to have your best drivers reach the most amount of drivers, customers, personal relationships, going to more events is probably more beneficial. And that's kind of the system that we run in the US, whether we think it's great or not. That's kind of the system that everybody is using. Is we want these guys to go to more events with more people there. The conditions are different. One might be in this state or this state, or, but that's the format that we're using for the teams and the drivers to kind of, I guess, promote their brands. And sure, I think and we have to remember too, a lot of these races are doing this for money. And I think the reason, probably and I'm not as familiar with the RCGP as maybe Toby is and the others, but I mean, I've been in several meetings with it, and it wasn't the fact that I didn't like the racing. It was that I didn't think it would work because there's not enough entries. There wasn't enough money to support to do it. And at the end, somebody has to be thinking they're making some money to keep doing it. And if you're only going to have 100 and, whatever the entries they had between the pro class, whatever they're calling RC1 or whatever, they had different. You have to, the big numbers is what is driving these individuals to make these events, and they're trying to generate some money. And in order to do the RCGP, they needed the money too. They're trying to get it from the manufacturers, which is not necessarily bad or a bad deal, but they really needed it from everybody. They needed it to make it work. You need it from everybody because it's a tremendous expense for them to do those events, and really the teams to travel. If you have to do 2 races in Europe, 2 in the United States, maybe one final somewhere, you're talking about a pretty big expense. If you just, for instance, you send Ryan to the Mugen Challenge, maybe it's $1,500, but if you're going to send them to Spain for the Worlds, it might be $4,000 or $5,000. So it's a pretty big difference. You can do 4 events in the U.S. for one international event. Now, granted, there's ways to save costs, with other drivers, and you can get the cost lower. But just as an example, those are the things I think you have to monitor. And I think going forward, I'm sure somebody else will, or RCGP or somebody will try to form this type of situation again, but it'll be the same challenges all over again. Is somebody needs to make some money in order for it to keep going, and it either has to come from the drivers or the sponsors or the participants, and that's always going to be, I think, the challenge.
Yep.
So, from my standpoint, if I was just only racing, I didn't care about the business. I just wanted to know who the best racer was. I think having that series, like you talked about, would be the best way to do it. But I think knowing the business and being in the industry, I think the way we're doing it probably makes some good sense as well, because there are reasons to go out and go to these big events where there's more racers, more people. You have that experience with the customer, and in our business, that means just as much sometimes as the results, is seeing maybe Davide Ungaro was great at the Worlds, and that could sell some associated cars, but if you had that personal relationship at some of these races also, you could generate just as much goodwill, I think, as he was able to get just by winning.
Yep. Cool. Thank you.
A lot of good insight there, for sure.
Definitely.
So, Jason, getting back to, let's say, the average Joe at a track, one of the guys that follows our podcast, local guy that we see out running, let's say he's just joined the hobby, gone to the track. How does somebody like that figure out what type of tire to run? Meaning, when they look at the surface of the track, a new guy doesn't really know anything. You're a tire manufacturer. What should a new guy look at for in characteristics of the track in order to start out and figure out what type of tire he should run?
I mean, what I always did as a racer is I just look at the track. I would walk up and I'd say, okay, is this wet? Is it dry? Are we in the morning? Are we in the afternoon? Are we at night? Is the sun going to have any effect on it throughout the day? And traditionally, when you're racing outdoors, the tracks are always they're more damp in the morning. They always have a little bit more moisture in it. It's usually when more of the dirt sticks to the tires. The usually, the softer compounds, the more, the smaller pin tires, a little softer combination is usually traditionally what works well because of those situations. And then depending on your weather, if the track starts to dry, you can visually start to see it drying. There usually will be a racing groove or something, a racing line starts to develop. Then is it warm? Is it cold? Then you can kind of start to see if it's warm, you start to change compound because the track is developing sort of a line, a groove. It's getting warmer, and you usually have to alter the compound at that time. Then you have to see, does it progress more in that direction, or does it start to deteriorate or tear up? Because sometimes you get both. Sometimes you get where the track is actually just getting better. The line's getting either wider or more grip on the line. And now you have to start to consider, all right, well, if I'm starting with a larger pin, should I go to a smaller pin to the point where you might be racing with bar style tires, and then harder compounds to the point where you might want to start going towards a compound that's, what people call like long wear compounds, stuff like that, where, the track has kind of started taking on some almost abrasion and, tire wear and rubber on the track. That starts to determine, the compound you're going to kind of start to move towards. And then as the day starts to finish, what's happening? Is the track start to go away where that dust that's on the outside or the outside stuff starts to come onto the line of the track? Or is the track continuing to get better? I mean, like when we were at like LCRC, when it gets dusk there, the track gets really bad. Like all the dust kind of comes in. Like about 2-3 in the afternoon, the track's like, it's like all of a sudden the sun's over the top, the groove is there, it gets warm. And then when the sun goes down, it's like all that dust that's there starts creeping on the track more and more. And now you have to keep up with that part of the conditions as well, where it's changing as you get into like dusk or to nighttime. And so that's what I have to do when I thought was racing, or when I'm watching, is this track is going through a change throughout the day. You can say, hey, it's 75% of the time you could say we're going to start with super soft or green compound tires, smaller pins like reflexes or whatever. Then you're going to start to transition to, all right, well, is the track drying up? Maybe we stay with the same tread. We're just going to change compound. Or is it deteriorating where you need to go to a larger pin or something that helps you kind of get through smaller rocks and ruts and these kind of like debris that's almost starting to start on the surface? So then you might have to change tread because of that. Or you get where the track is just maturing so much where you have a line, there's no bumps, there's no ruts. It's just getting smoother and more high grip. Then you start going the other way with your tread where you're almost going lower tread, to get you more surface area, more speed, becomes more 10 scale like. And then, you can, check your compound situation, but it's usually determined by how hot the track is. And then you work towards the evening where if the sun goes down, you don't have that warm condition. You might have to go back to the softer tire at night, depending on if it's deteriorated the track or if it's in really smooth, good condition. You could, that can determine your the pin type or size at that point. So that's really the game of this. Is sure you could, there's a lot of times too where people will say, hey, I want to go to the Silver State Nitro Challenge in Vegas. It's indoors. They're like, what do I need for tires? And I'm like, well, I might be able to just run reflexes the whole time. It's sure there's people that won't run that same tire the entire time, but really your plus or minus of just running the same tire the whole time, maybe only like 5 positions. You could be 5 positions up, 5 positions down, and you didn't change anything, versus a guy that just chased it the entire time and never arrived at anything he liked, versus the guy that just said, you know what, this is working, it's getting me around, I'm just going to stick with it and stick it out. And so I think there is something to be said for reining in what you like. When I first started going to the races with Ryan, I would take everything we had, every different compound, and it really was more confusing than anything. And it got to the point where I realized that I was, as a racer, more risky because I felt like I needed a little bit extra. So if I looked at the track and I wanted to make a call, I would kind of lean towards the more riskier selection, because I was like, I want that advantage if there ever is one. If there's a little bit of an advantage, I want it, because I felt I needed a little extra speed. Whereas Ryan is like, his mindset is always like, I just don't want to be screwed. Because I feel like if the car is in a certain window, I can drive it. I know how to adapt to it. I just don't want to be running the worst option. Give me something that's close and I can adjust, and I'll get the most I can, whether it's not the best, but I'll get the most out of it. And so he was a little more conservative on his approach, because he could fall back on the idea that he's going to maximize with what he has, and he feels like it's going to be good enough. Whereas somebody like me, I was like, you know what, I'm going for it, because if I could gain 5 seconds on my overall time, that could be the difference between me TQing or being 5th. And that might be my moment, right? I might be able to take advantage of this moment and get it. But so there are those different ways to do it. I think you have to always kind of know what kind of driver you really are. Are you entry level? Are you like a regional level? Are you national level, world level? And you have to kind of make a call that isn't confusing, that makes kind of sense for you and your driving and what you're capable of. And, if you're concerned if you're just concerned about tenths of a second, then I think, and you're not that great you're not a world-class driver, then that's probably too little amount to be concerned about, because there's so much more to it. Is your engine right? Is your, did you run clean? How's your overall run? It's like, if you're concerned about a couple tenths on your tire selection, but your driving really isn't at that level, then you're probably overthinking it, because really the best thing that person can do is run their best 5 or 10 minute run or whatever it is. If you run your best run there's way more to gain than a couple tenths, right? So you have to know those things, and you have to be kind of honest with yourself where you're at in the game. And are you risky, or are you conservative, or is there really anything for you to gain by going way in left field or way off, on a tangent? And I think so. I guess the summary is, you kind of have to know yourself, your skills, what your expectation is, and you watch the track, and that there is going to be some kind of change throughout the day. and you have to know the day usually starts like this. It matures to a certain point, and then there always is some kind of a change at night, or if you're going to race into the night. Even if it's late in the day, the sun might still be out, or it's light out, but the temperature changes by 10 or 15 degrees. And then the dust changes on the track. So I think you got to know those things. And honestly, that was my favorite part of being a racer and racing outdoors, was making the call on, we used to pit net, close to the track. You could look at the track all day long, and we'd sit there in the pits and you'd just look up and say, oh, time for blues. And you're like, you put on your blue tires or whatever we had at the time, and you'd make the change. And then if you look out at the track and you say, you know what, I think we're ready for bar tires right now. And you look at this and you say, I'm going for it. And, you might run a main, or it's a club race or something. You might run a main and you went for it. And that's what I was used to doing. And that's how I kind of learned what to do and what not to do. And you still it's still not an exact science. It's based a lot on what you've seen in your racing time and matching what you've seen with what you're seeing in person. And then you kind of blend those things together with your skills, and that's how it comes out. Right? Like, that's how it works. We were at the Worlds. It works the exact same way. I was at a Euros about 5 years ago, and we were working with LRP there, and Jurgen was trying to, basically, while we were at the race, he was trying to make a spreadsheet of like what tire to run when at one occasion and what temperature range. And it's like, so there he had a guy that was talking to me, and like, they made up, all the different categories in Excel, and he's got all the different tires and all the different compounds and the different conditions. And they're like, okay, so I think I got it. So if this time I'm going to choose this tire, and then if it looks like this, I'm going to do this tire with this compound. I'm like, okay, yeah. So you got to there. I'm like, all right, so we got that. And then it's like, but if this happens, then you might be over here. And they're like, oh no, wait, like that's not working right with my, and I'm like, well, that's what I'm trying to tell you. Like, it's sure you could get maybe 75% of the way there, but there's a little bit of, there's a variable. There's a variable there that it's hard to exactly have the perfect chart of what somebody can do. And then somebody might just blow it out of the water. You might have a great driver that comes out there and says, you know what, I'm going to run this today. It's going to work. I know it is. And then they go out there and they do well with it. And you're like, well, that completely ruined my, and that happens. That's what happened when we were trying to make this spreadsheet. Is you can make it okay. You can follow a certain pattern and a path like we talked about, and you can get pretty close, the morning, the afternoon, the evening, choosing the pin tire, the bigger pins, the bars, or but there are some variables that you throw in there that really ruin the spreadsheet. Like, and it was driving them nuts because they couldn't, they couldn't exactly do it perfectly. So it was kind of fun anyway. So, I don't know if that 100% answered the question, but yeah.
Well, it does, because I think the answer to the question is there is no perfect option, right? It's always going to vary in.
Yeah.
Like the spreadsheet.
Well, yeah. And, I have racers that grew up racing 10 scale indoors, like Spencer, who he's like, I just want the best tire. Just give me whatever is the best tire for the time. I'm like, well, and you know what I mean? That's up to interpretation here. Like, you're evaluating all these things. And I said, how I used to do it is we look at the track. You know what temperature it kind of is. You look at the track, you see what the conditions are, and you make a choice based on your experience. And like for him, he's like, I hate that, like, because I could be on the wrong tire. I'm like, yeah, exactly. Like that's that can happen. And he's like, well, I don't like that at all. And I'm like, that's how it works. Like, so sometimes you race 10 scale indoors, or if you're racing carpet these days, you're almost on one tire, or 10 scale indoors, you're almost on one tire. It's kind of easier, right? The only condition is do you run new ones or old ones? That's recently in 10 scale. That's it. You're running one tire. Do you run new ones or old ones? That's pretty much it. But when you're racing outdoors and every track is different, nobody has the same dirt. Nobody preps it the same way. There's a ton of different ways to go about it. And the only true way is you have to keep an eye on it. You watch other cars. I guess that was the other thing we didn't really talk about there, was watching the other cars. That was a big thing, is when you're watching yourself, you have people that you're like, well, I know he's running this or that right now. He's out there and it looks pretty good. I'm going to be up in 3 or 4 races or a half an hour. Maybe I'm going to stick to running similar to what he just did. It looked pretty good to me. So I think that's the other side of it, is a little bit of cheating there, right? Is just watching people that are racing either before or after you to determine what they did and if it worked for them. And then you can kind of work that into your own program. But I think, like I said, in general, it's the conditions during the day. Most of the time you're starting off with a looser condition in the morning, or a wetter condition, I guess. You transition, if the weather's good, you're transitioning to more of a drier, cleaner line. Maybe the line opens up, and then you're maybe changing compound to reflect that. And then as it gets closer to the end of the day or at night, has it deteriorated or has it gotten better? And then how did the temperature change? And you kind of go from there. And I think with some of these tracks and conditions, usually when it's warm out or hot and it's abrasive, you're typically running a little harder tire. If it's cold, you're traditionally running a little softer tire. And if it's like a slick groove where the track is smooth and it's got a line and a groove, but it's really smooth, then I think that's a position where you might be running lower tread or getting into maybe clay compounds, and which is a situation we were in the Worlds.
That's such great information. I know a lot of guys are listening, and it definitely answers a lot of questions for them. Since you brought up Worlds, I know Tom had a couple great questions lined up in regards to Worlds tires, durability, all that type of stuff. Tom, you want to jump in with your question?
Well, I had a bunch of them, so I want to try to make sure we get to everybody. I know we are kind of bouncing all over the place. You got to give me one more after this. But Jason, what are your thoughts on Worlds? What was that?
We're going round robin around the screen.
I did see a new tire that was put out there, which was kind of cool. But I feel like as a whole, I think you kind of covered it already, right? Why some of the Americans struggled, right? Because the traction and the conditions were a little bit different than I think we're accustomed to, significantly different. But any other factors you can think of why, it's hard to say they struggle, right? You get the best in the world there. But your take on that. If you look, reflecting now, what could have you done different, or what could have we've done different to improve our results overall?
Well, I think there's several things, right? I mean, we could kind of lean on this idea that the Americans were struggling because it wasn't their style track or their kind of track, but at the same time, Elliott Boots won our Dirt Nitro Challenge, but that was at the Dirt. And then Juan Carlos Canas won the Silver State. So really, they won on our style tracks and on their style tracks. So I think that to kind of just say, well, the kind of track didn't necessarily suit them the best, I think that's a little bit of a cop-out too, because I think it's like they were winning on, our style tracks. I think really what it is there's certain times in everybody's career where they're at the top of their game and they're racing well. And I really think that right now we're in a cycle of the European drivers really having a stranglehold on the better 8-scale results. They have, I think, a few drivers that are in the peak of their racing powers, whether it's Davide, whether it's Juan Carlos Canas, or, there's several drivers that are in sort of their peak. And if you have to really look at our racers from the US, we're really still relying for the most. I mean, Ryan's the Roar National Champion, and Dakota was second. And these are the guys that, like it or not, Ryan is 38 years old, and Dakota is 26 or maybe 27. And we don't have, we haven't had somebody yet that's 19, 20, 21 years old that have just come and take it away from those guys. And I think we have some drivers like, Mason Fuller, and, we obviously got Phi Long, who's really young, talented racer, he's really on the other end of he's really young. But I think that we're really in a period where our superstars are guys that we've been depending on for years and years and years. Obviously, we'll call Ty Tessman, he was a Roar racer. I mean, he's from Canada, but he was a Roar racer. He ran all of our nationals. He ran all the United States races. He retired. He doesn't race anymore. Jared Tebow, he was one of our best racers of all time from America. He doesn't race anymore. And all of our superstars are kind of, I'm not going to say aging, but they are at the other side of their career, not the beginning side of their career. And I think that what we're dealing with is we're racing drivers from Europe who are on the front side of their career. They're ascending, with the exception of Elliott Boots. I mean, he's still in his early 30s, I think. But we have, so I think that's really more of the situation. It's not so much, sure, the track, I think, did benefit the drivers that have raced in Europe for sure, because they've been there more. That would be the condition no matter what. But I think really the underlying theme is, I think their drivers that are peaking right now, from an age and a skill, their equipment, everything, they're the ones that are peaking at the moment. And I think that we haven't had anybody come up through the ranks and just take it from our other guys that are the ones that we rely on, the Ryans and Dakotas and these guys. They are still holding it down at these races in the United States for a long time now. And going back just a couple months to the Roar Nats, they're still the same guys. So it's like we haven't had somebody just come up that's younger, hungrier, just as skilled, if not more skilled, that just took it away and they're ready to go to the Worlds and they're ready to take over. We don't have that. It hasn't arrived yet. Whether it's Mason Fuller, he's close. probably the closest that we have at the moment to being able to do that in that class, 8 scale. And, obviously then you got looking, there is other drivers right in that age range, between, 19 and 25 years old. There's a bunch of racers in there, but then you jump down to like Felong and you're like, well, he's 13, and it's like, where is this going to go? But to me, I mean, he qualified directly into the semifinal at the Worlds. He got third at the Roar Nationals. He's pretty legit of a racer at that age. So if they can keep him on the right track, it's possible that he could be the guy that comes in and finally steals this away from some of the guys that have been so dominant here over the years. I mean, even Ryan Cavallari, Jared Tebow, these guys, Ty Tessman, Dakota, and Mayfield, they've absolutely dominated the results for like almost 20 years. And so it's really going to take that next group of guys that are coming into their own, that really have that confidence and can really, take that next step forward and be in the peak of their racing. And I think more than anything, I think that is really the case. Sure, I think if we move the race, say it was at the dirt in Arizona and it was more, the conditions were more towards what our guys are racing on, I think they for sure would have had a better overall performance. Like I said, is Lutz going to be in the 50s or 60s? No, there's no way. Is Ryan going to be in the, quarterfinals? No, probably not. These guys are, I think as a group that would move up the scale, they would all slide up if the race was, but the ultimate winner, you're still going to be racing these guys, the Juan Carlos, you're going to be racing Ungaro, you're going to be racing Elliott Boots. And I think those are the guys that are just the hottest overall at the moment. And that's what we're really battling. Besides the condition, besides any kind of home track advantage, you're battling with people that are at the top of their game.
So Jason, a follow-up question from your perspective. I know I'm focused in the Northeast. Our podcast is focused in the Northeast. And I'm relatively, 5-6 years getting more competitive with it. You have obviously more history. From your perspective, thinking about it, whether it's United States market or globally, do you see the hobby growing? And compared to maybe what it was 10, 15, 20 years ago, is there a specific sector that's growing faster than another? And your thoughts on, how to continue to grow the hobby?
I think what's different from when I was, starting and where things are at today is there's anything you can think of, you can get now. And when I think about some of this stuff, I think the hobby in general is bigger than it ever has been, but it's probably also more spread out. Like, there's, crawler trucks, monster trucks, there's minis, there's 8 scale, 10 scale, on road, there's, 20 different classes of on road. And, so I think it's bigger than it ever has been as a whole, because anything you can think of, you can get. You can get probably a small one, you can get a big one, and you can get the medium size. They have everything today. So I think in terms of all the available options, there's tons of these, tons of options. And I think that's what makes it probably bigger than it ever has been. Where I think it's probably more difficult is I think the perception when I started or when I was in it, I think it was easier and less intimidating to get started because there wasn't. Today, people make such a big deal about, when I started, there was no setup sheets. There was no am I running the right shock oil, or do I have the right piston, or do I have the latest this? There was none of that. You just went and did it. And you didn't really know, you went and tried it, and later on you figured out, oh, maybe maybe I could have done this different. And where today is I see people that they won't go race because they didn't think they had something. And it's like it just seems so kind of like, like uninspiring to me that they didn't want to go race because it's like, oh, well, the hot spring that I wanted or the hot piston wasn't available. So I just decided not to even go. And it's like, well, that's not really, you could make it work. You know what I mean? Like, it's not that. So I think the value today that people place on all the individual components of this car, I think is a little bit wrong. Whereas it's like, I always talk to people, whereas, Spencer was a good example where we would talk about the body on the car, right? And I'd say, okay, so the performance of the body, whatever body you're running on the car, I go, what do you think that this, on a scale of 1 to 10, is the body a 1 or is it a 10? You know what I mean? Like, so if the performance of this particular part, is it a 1 or is it a 10? And and I think the problem that I see is people place such a high value on each and every little thing these days because everything's so adjustable, and there's so many different setups and options and the ways to go about with your equipment, tires, inserts, compounds, are you gluing this and not doing that? There's so many of these little things, but to me, everything can't be a level 10 of importance because it just wouldn't make any sense, right? Like there's things that are a level 10 of importance, right? You have to be the best driver you can be. That can't be a 1. That has to be as high as it can be. But your body, it's really, it doesn't have to be a 10. It's not that, it's in the grand scheme of things, the performance of the body isn't as big as either the tire or the driving, right? Those are obviously the biggest thing. And so I think today people see some of these things and they see a setup sheet or they see what everything somebody is using. And it's like, not every one of these things is a level 10 of importance. Sure, it all comes together as a package and it creates a great car or great performance. But it's like, I think you have to determine what are the most important items, for the performance. And then the rest of it are fine tuning items. And I think today when I hear people talking and when I hear racers talk, they make very small changes and they'll say things like, well, it doesn't even go around the track. And I'm like, well, it goes around the track. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you can go around the track. Now, did you just have a slight little, thing that you didn't like in a turn or coming in, going out, jumping characteristic that you didn't like? Okay, now I accept that. But that it doesn't go around the track, no, I don't accept that. Like, you can go around the track with garbage, right? Like, it's just a level of what it is. So it's like, I think the way people analyze some of these things is, I think it makes them a little bit scared that they're doing the wrong thing. And I think that knowing what all these adjustments and things, sure, they all do play into a bigger part, but I think it's important to know that don't be afraid to do these different, to not have everything, because if you're missing out on actually going and driving, you're actually hurting yourself, because you need that track time. You need the experience. You can't do without that, because the number one thing is really the driving. That's how you get everything.
Absolutely.
Is your driving. So if you're not sharpening that tool because you're afraid of not having the right setup or the right thing or the right spring that day, then you're only really hurting yourself. So today, that's what I see with people is they're very in tune with the details, and the details are neat, and we push those, I guess, as because we want people to see it as real racing, and we push all these individual changes and components and everything you can adjust on the car because we want it to relate to real racing, which is great. But at the same time, you shouldn't limit your experience or your time because you're afraid of not having one of these things right. You really need to go out and try them on your own. It really should be the opposite. You should go out and say, I'm going to go out there without all this stuff and I'm going to try to make it the best I can. And maybe you'll actually learn something. And in the process, you're sharpening the best tool, which is your driving. And that's the magic wand of everything is the driving. You know, a great driver can make the most, garbage car and everything look great. But it's when you combine a great driver with the great package, then when you get the outstanding results. But the number one thing is the driving. And if you don't put the time in there and experience these things, you're not gonna do very well overall. And I think people are just a little bit afraid today because of those things. So it's a little bit of an intimidation factor today where, I had a friend of mine that hasn't raced in 24 years. And he's always like, well, I have 100 questions for you about my car, getting a car and the setup and everything. And I'm thinking, just get it built. Like go to the track and I'll check it out. It's like, but and he's even from the old school and the old era, but he's already adapting to the ways of today where it's like, he's afraid of getting something wrong the first day out. And it's like, look, you're going to destroy this thing before any of these things are really even a factor for you. You're going to have to run a lot of laps before any of this stuff is actually going to be a big concern. But I think there was a little bit of innocence, a lot more innocence when I started in RC, and to where I think there was a golden age of 10 scale, and there probably is a golden age of 8 scale. I'm not exactly sure when it was or if we're in it. I get the feeling that we're on kind of the other side of the golden age of 8 scale for some reason, but like the golden age might have been a few years ago, but I'm not 100% sure. But I'm sure the golden age of 10 scale was definitely quite a while ago. And now we're just, everything is evolving. It's different. The 10 scale racing I did, it doesn't even really exist anymore compared to what's going on today. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I wish they all existed because I think there'd be more racers and more entries, but but that's just not not the way things go. But I think in general, those are the differences. The innocence of pre-internet, pre-information versus today, knowing a lot to make everybody kind of dangerous and a little bit intimidated and afraid, I think is the difference. I think RC in general is bigger than it ever has been. Racing is probably very similar in size to how it has always been. The only difference is I think we have more large categories. Maybe the golden age of 10 scale was really big, and the golden age of 8 scale was big. But now we have those two kind of going almost simultaneously. Then you have on-road and, everything else that goes along with it. That's a part of the racing scene is still doing well. And so I think in general that's kind of where I see it, I guess.
Love it. No, good information and good perspective, right? I think I have to agree, right? There's a lot of diversity in classes. Heck, I even see an A scale with expert, intermediate, 40 plus. There's, it's good and bad.
Well, Yeah, speaking of more classes, I'll just roll into my question that for you next is I would love to hear your take on vintage racing. You have AE dropping all these cars, and now they have parts support. And I see even on our website, when I go to order parts, tires, I see you're constantly dropping parts for these vintage cars, which is awesome to see. It's trying to actually tugging on me to get back into it as well. But what's your take on that?
What I think really needs to happen that hasn't, well, I'm not going to say it hasn't happened, but there are vintage races that are gaining popularity and being better um, in these different countries. You know, there's vintage events happening, and we have a few of them in the United States. But I think what's really missing is maybe some of the Associateds or the Kyoshos or you know, maybe even us at some point actually showing what and supporting a vintage class of how it's supposed to look, the conditions it's supposed to be raced in, and actually building and presenting the track in a way that fits the cars the best. Because the issue I think that is going to happen right now is the cars, the way they're built, they're just not very durable compared to what we're accustomed to racing now, especially if you're an 8-scale racer or something like that. I mean, the cars are just amazing in those classes, what they could put them through. But you know, the ball cups that we used to use in the old days in 10 scale that are coming on like an RC10, RC10T. I mean, this stuff, you can't take them out to a track that's really running today, and somebody that's not accustomed to that style, they're going to have issues with these cars, I think. And it's going to deter their interest because there's breakage, you pop off ball cups, and you're just like, hey, this sucks, you know, this is not very good. So, and I think, so to me, there's two things. Like, you really need the track to represent the car that you're racing. So if you're going to run these older model cars or vehicles, the track really needs to be different. And somebody, whether it's the Associateds or the Kyosho's doing a lot of stuff, Tamiya does a lot of stuff, or if it's somebody like us, you really need to have tracks and conditions that favor those kind of vehicles, whether they're more tame, they're smaller, the jumps are more suited to the vehicle, so that people can have the appropriate experience with the car. Because otherwise, I think what I've seen is everybody takes these cars because they either want to make it more durable or have an advantage. Probably having the advantage is the biggest thing. They put modern parts on them. So, and then you have to decide, well, what's the limit? You know, are we racing vintage cars, or are we racing modern cars, or are we racing a combination of the two? And what I see at a lot of these vintage events is nobody really has a consistent set of rules that state, all right, this is kind of the, you know, what we see it as in this class, and this is kind of where we want to, you know, cut it here. Everybody has a different opinion as where these lines are drawn, and throughout the world and every different event. So I think that's kind of important, and I think it's important for the Associateds or whoever releasing these cars. They really should be more involved in racing them, because I think at the moment, or using the product, I think the issue at the moment is they're seeing good sales by releasing a, you know, 40th anniversary RC10, because people do want it. They're like, hey, I had one, I want to get another one, whatever. But really, you would see a lot better benefit if people use them. Like, and you have to actually, you know, get parts for them. You maybe had to get a fresh kit. You just wanted to build another one for another class. So if you really got behind this stuff and built tracks and conditions that more suited those vehicles, and then kind of took it that direction, then I think you would have even more success with the vintage stuff than they already are. The reason it's having any success right now is because people my age or even older that kind of romanticize with these older vehicles, they're buying them and they're buying multiple ones when they come out. So that's why they're selling them, because people are buying, multiples of the same car. And so the numbers look good to an associated, like, hey, these are selling. Yeah, well, yeah, they are selling because the people are in the right age range. Maybe they have disposable money and they're like, hey, I always wanted an RC10 when I was a kid. I never got one. Now I'm getting 3, right? Like that, So that might be a situation for somebody, but I think they need to be able to use them at some point. If you're going to keep selling and coming out with these things, somebody needs to use them at some point, because otherwise you're going to hit like a dead spot where people are just like, look, I'm done with this. Like, I have 10 of these things and I've got every one that you guys have released and I haven't used any of them. I haven't built any of them. And I think it would be better if people used them. And, but I think you can't go really run them in the current configuration on a modern track. It really takes a little bit of a dedicated bunch to make it right, and bring a little bit of sense to the classes, the modifications that are allowed in the thing, and see if it has some real legs to it. Because at the moment, it's easy for it to look successful because I think everyone has a little bit of a love for these cars and they're buying them, but there will reach a point where people are a little bit tired of it, and then it'll just fall off a cliff, and then Associated will be like, oh, we're not doing it anymore. They don't sell. And you're like, well, there is something to keep them selling. You should probably need to be able to use them. But I mean, personally, I like all the cars. I like all the stuff. But I don't have any real desire to run a vintage car on a modern track. If I'm going to run a vintage car, I kind of want to do it in a vintage setting, or where it's really more supposed to be used on. If I'm going to run on a modern track, I'm just going to run a modern car. Like, I guess that just makes more sense to me. But in general, it's nice to see that they're having some success, and I hope they continue with it. There's still some good ones out there that haven't been released yet. There's ones that people have always wanted that I think have never been released, and I think they also need to be a little careful not to do too much. They've kind of been riding that. Well, they're not really riding the line. They've kind of gone over it. I mean, you got 3 RC10s in less than a year. So they're hitting it hard. So they realize that that's the magic name and the magic car is the RC10. But you got to, I think there's a fine line there. People get sick of it, or you can't, it'd be nice a year or 2 down the road that there's still something you wanted to have that they could release, and you kind of keep it going. So, yeah, I guess that's how I see it.
Yeah, Losi need to bring out some of those old cars. That's the only thing that's really missing, I think.
Yeah, and they're in a different position where I think, owned by Horizon these days. I think to them, they just, this is of course me just thinking about it from their perspective, but when they look at it, I don't think they see the numbers. They look at it and they say, yeah, we could do that, but would it be better use of our time if we devoted it to another ARMA project or another Axial project or something in the Losi brand? I think that's how they evaluate it, is the use of our time is probably better than this.
Yeah. Yeah, like re-releasing the Electrons.
And I think, they have some great Team Losi items from the past. Some great, for me, I think the number one, I think for them would be the Double X. I think that would probably be the best version of themselves, I guess. Like to me, like Associated, in my opinion, Associated is the RC10, the gold chassis, all that. That's what people remember. I think for low C, their first car was the JRX2, and they had those. But I think the RC10 for low C people is the Double X. To me, the Double X was their best car at the right time, and probably their best seller. And I think that probably would mean a lot.
Is the Double X, excuse me for asking, because I just don't recall, is that the 10 scale 4-wheel drive platform? Is that what a Double X was?
Double X first was the 2-wheel drive, and then they made a Double X4, which was the 4-wheel drive. So
gotcha. Yeah, I actually had that car prior to getting in and meeting these guys and actually going racing. It was my first car back into the hobby from like a Radio Shack impulse buy, walking through the mall after 10 years, and then hobby store, MRC, and then a Triple X. That was a pretty good car.
Yeah, their original line was the JRX2 was the first car. Then they had a JRX Pro SE. They had that was kind of their original line. And then when they kind of they got so far, they got as far as they could go with the JRX line, and then they made a car called the Double X, and it was really, I think, the first time they got everything right at the same time with a vehicle. And I think that was probably their best car. I think it really was. And I mean, obviously cars today are nicer, work better, but I think given the time period, the golden age of 10 scale, that was probably their best car. And they had, that's at the same time they were able to get Brian Kinwald on the team from Associated, and it was just probably the peak, I would say.
So I have a question in terms of like a future maybe on the horizon, or maybe a future product that J Concepts may consider. Would we ever see the possibility of you developing a shock for eighth scale off-road cars?
I don't think so, because I think the issue would be, it would be one thing is if you could get the same shock on every car. And then I think it would be worth your while to have a front, a rear, and then they would all work on every car. But just thinking of it off the top of my head, I think would be difficult for the same shock to fit on every different car. And I think that would be the number one, that would be the reason it would sell well, that you could sell the same shock for every car. And if you had to make a different shock for every car, I think then you would be really limiting, it'd be real complicated, and you would be kind of limiting what you could accomplish with that product. And I think on top of it, you'd have to have a better shock than what is available. It'd have to be better than what the other ones are that are out there, and make people convert to yours over something else. And, today you're the drivers are pretty restricted on items like that. So I know a lot of people in the game over the years, I guess, is like even the Kyosho shocks, for instance, have always been one, considered a good one in the market in 8 scale, especially. And I know there have been drivers that put Kyosho shocks on an Associated and, on TLR cars and stuff over the years. But what ends up happening is then if you're on a team where say you're an associated driver, all it takes is them to say, you know what, we're not using Kyosho shocks anymore. You got to use associated shocks. That's what we sell. That's what comes with the kit. And then it kind of cuts that all off. So for us, that could be a problem unless you got some kind of approval, but it could be a problem trying to get the other teams to accept your part as an aftermarket or an approved aftermarket part for everybody. So it could limit the use of the racers, and then also would limit kind of your reach getting further into each chassis, I guess. But I mean, there's been some that I've seen people make some that either didn't get all the way into production or went to limited production, or there was those adjustable valve ones, right? Somebody had one of those. I don't know if it made it all the way to production and price is a big problem. This is racing, but at the same time, it is, it has to meet a certain price point. Otherwise people also see it as a negative. So, your shocks, if your kit is $600, but your shocks are $300, that kind of ruins your market a little bit, because that's the first thing people are going to say is, well, I just brought my car with $600 and now you want to buy, shocks for $300. I could just buy a whole nother car. So the price becomes a factor at some point. So you have to be able to manufacture these parts at a reasonable amount so that they're a considerable, that people consider it as an aftermarket item that they can purchase and try. If it's unreasonable from a price standpoint or doesn't make any sense to people, they're not going to buy it either. But people love shocks. There is something to it, and somebody will do it better at some point. I always say that the part that I think really hurts us in that side of things is there really is, in the grand scheme of things, there isn't a lot of stroke with an RC car on the track. So you're dealing with such a small amount of stroke from where the car is at full droop to where the chassis is bottomed, that a lot of magic has to go into a very small amount of stroke in the shock. So, and everything has to be small. That's the other thing in RC is, when you get into these, trophy trucks and whatever, you got dirt bikes or trophy trucks, everything's allowed to be a little bigger, and you can get a little bit better because you really just have more space and more, I think, area to work with. I think in RC, you have to start watching the space, and all of our stuff hangs outside the body with a buggy. All the caps and everything is just all exposed all the time, and durability is a big part of it. Obviously probably one of the best parts about a good shock is it also doesn't break, right? It's like, if it's the best performing item, but it's not durable, you're out there running a 60-minute main and you hits just one little thing wrong and your shock breaks, it wasn't any good either. So I think that's always been a big hurdle in RC is the size and durability that we're dealing with. Having extra, items to add to the shock body, or, like you see in other motorsports and different things. It's hard to get that in the small package. And I think somebody will do it better at some point, but I think that's the challenge, the space and the cost and you're really the small amount of actual stroke that you're dealing with from full to the chassis being bottom. You have to have a lot of magic that happens in a short amount of space to be better, right?
Sure. I just figured I'd ask the question. I hear it talked about, quite often that it's probably one of the areas of the car that's lagged, behind the most, that probably needed an upgrade. So I figured, hoping you might be the guy to smile when I asked the question.
There's people that are really into it, and but that's always been my thing, is the size of them, the durability, and how small of an stroke window that you have, that the greatness has to occur, because it's not a lot. It's not a lot of room there, and I don't think, and I think there's also a lot of things in RC where you're, we run such a low ride height in RC. We use the chassis a lots of times in RC, in jumping, and the chassis is constantly hitting everything, and it's abused, and it's part of the suspension essentially, along with the tires. So RC is, to me, is a lot different there. Having that big blank chassis on the bottom, and it always hitting everything all the time, is a big part of the way the cars perform the way that they do, I think. Good or bad. I don't really know, good or bad. But you look at these chassis when the races, when you're driving, and you're like, this thing is on the chassis the entire time. It's destroyed. So, and I'm sure that's a big part of the performance of the car. Is going up the face of these jumps and landing, is you're either guiding with the chassis, or you're landing with the chassis to some extent. And but then if you make everything high where the chassis doesn't hit, and you have all this droop in the car, and you're trying to run it at a higher ride height, and pretty soon you're like, well, this doesn't work either, because I just raised all my weight, so I had all this ground clearance, and now my ride height is really high, and that's not really how we race, right? We race with the cars low. We race with the cars. We have tons of turns to be concerned about, and for as many attributes as these RC cars have to other vehicles, they're still really, I think, a lot different from that standpoint. And I think there's a lot to do with that running height and ground clearance that we work with, is just it's pretty wild.
Never really thought about the chassis as part of that, but you're absolutely right.
Need to maintain a low center of gravity as well. That makes sense.
Well, Jason, we've been on the show about 2 hours, so we definitely don't want to abuse the amount of time that you've offered to us. But does Tom, Vin, or Toby have any additional questions? We definitely don't want you to leave. I just want to wrap up, see if there's any questions, and then typically Vin jumps into a setup segment. We'd love you to hang out and see part of that and possibly comment on it. You're more than welcome to, but I just wanted to see if any of the guys had any other questions.
So I'll tell you straight up, I don't have a setup segment for tonight. My setup segment is to ask Jason about his tires and a couple things that we do to him. So if you guys don't have any questions, I will go ahead and do that.
Sure, we might have a couple questions before he takes off, but take it away, Vin. Center stage is yours.
All right. So
you're gonna have Jason up there, possibly.
So now, yeah, I'm going to definitely take advantage of this time to pick your brain a little bit, Jason, on tire prep. So I see a lot of our best racers are manipulating the foams, whether we cut the foams, punch holes in them. So I'm going to, if it's okay, I'd like to start there and ask you, when do we, on our J Concepts tires in particular, when do we punch holes versus, maybe cut the foams? When do we do what?
Well, I think what's kind of happening is, we used to cut the inserts or put holes in them really to make them softer is kind of what we used to do. When we kind of started with the closed cell inserts, I guess that was the first road that we went down was, you would, I want to say the first time we ever had closed cell inserts for 10 scale, we went to a race and I remember people using a hole punch and putting holes all the way through them, which was kind of cool. I mean, that's what that material has been amazing from that standpoint because the durability is really high with that stuff. But so that it's really, opened the window for all this manipulation with the foams, whether you're cutting holes in them, whether you're, then we kind of got into this phase where we started cutting, we call a V cut, where we put a V in the center of the foam, cut it in the V. So it kind of relaxed the center of the tire a little bit. And then we kind of, and all this stuff has been going on for a long time. Going back to even 10 scale, we would manipulate open cell foams. And then we had double stage, triple stage inserts in 10 scale. So it's, we've been all over the map with inserts over the years to the point where we didn't even have them. There was a point we didn't have inserts. The tires just supported itself because they were harder. But anyway, getting into more of the 8 scale inserts. But then, and I think I want to say that going back, besides like the Kinwald stuff, is we really started, I want to say around 2010 or 11, Mayfield he started being real critical on really the shape of the tire. And the insert plays a big role in the shape of the tire. The tire and this was kind of all leads into, a lot of the stuff that was happening during the Worlds with the tire size and all that kind of thing for us is all about the insert because, but going back when, Ryan wanted a certain profile of his tire, we were running a little bigger pin tire at the time, but he wanted it to have a smaller profile. And we started trimming the inserts so that the tire would just have a flatter profile or a little lower profile. And, that was something, we always did in 10 scale. And over the years, getting into this closed cell material, you really have a lot more options today with that material because it's much more durable. So you can really cut it, manipulate it, glue it. There's so many things you can do with that material. So anyway, yeah, cutting the insert on the inside, cutting the fluted parts, it's kind of where it has a step on a lot of the inserts, and we cut that off. You can make these things 4 or 5 millimeters smaller just by cutting the inserts and manipulating the size of the inserts. So, it started way back then in, 10, 11, where Ryan was changing these. He wanted, a certain size, and, we could just trim the inserts. We could get the size the way that was needed for that tire, that track, to the point where now it's what we've been doing recently is some of these tracks have, like in Europe where we ran the Euros, or where they're treating a track and it's smooth or it's glued. You're kind of, it's kind of advantageous to have either a flatter profile or a smaller tire. And with the insert, you can do a lot of these things because, you can control 4, 5, 6 millimeters of size just depending on how much you cut the insert. and on the inside and make it smaller. So I think that's really the basics. You can trim that stuff, and you can manipulate the curve of the tire, the height of the tire, and the profile. And I think the thing that's not everybody always takes into account, but I think is important, is when you do run these tires, even if you mount them the way the insert comes, which a lot of people do, is just the driving and the running of the tire. The insert is compressing over time, so it kind of will stay there. So when you're out running and you're just constantly beating these things up, jumping and accelerating and braking, and you're beating up the insert, and it is getting more compressed. So from the time you mount your tire when it's brand new and you're looking at it to the time you maybe put 45 minutes on it, it's smaller. It's flatter. It's usually smaller, but you kind of notice over time that it doesn't necessarily hurt the performance at all, but you might even like it better at the end of its life than it did at the beginning. And that might be why a person would want to cut the inserts at the beginning, because they want that feel that they experience at the end more towards the beginning when they're new. So that's really the cutting of the insert. We're not doing is the holes really much anymore recently because of the high traction and the glued tracks. We've done more of just cutting that center fluted area off, I guess. And it's really, I call it the stepped area. We cut that part off. The insert's smaller, tire is smaller. And people start like that on a high traction track with a bar tire. And that's been really good for us. But I think when you start, when we go to like Race Time Entertainment or at the Mugen Challenge, stuff like that, they were starting with a very stock size insert. They were only really cutting them a little bit if they really wanted to make the profile a little lower to start with, but not as much insert manipulation, in my opinion, going on for our tracks and our races, because I think what sometimes you have, like we said earlier, is just naturally running it gets a little smaller anyway. So you have to kind of know that going in, because if you make these changes and make it small when you start, the size of the tire or the insert, it's going to get smaller as you run. So that was the situation at the Worlds where we were cutting the inserts and gluing them to the wheel, which that's another side of it. But so we were starting with a tire that we had already cut the insert and we glued it to the wheel. So we're starting with it at a position where it would be, if you had natural wear, probably at like 45 or 60 minutes. We're starting with the tire in that configuration, which was all still legal in size. The 109, magical number everybody talked about during the race. All the stuff is legal through a qualifier, 10, 20 minutes. It's when you get past 20 minutes that the tire has undergone so much, it's compressing the insert so much that you can start to fall underneath that 109 because of the length of the race and how much abuse you're putting on it. So, the easy thing at the time was to just tell the racers, well, we're going to have to start with a larger insert that we didn't cut if they're going to tech this that late in a race. And it still would be close because you're doing so much tire damage while the race is going on a track that's glued and abrasive. You're really in a 60-minute race, you're destroying the tires. So that's where we were at. That's what the whole thing was about, was when do you tech it? Do you tech the tire before? Do you tech it afterward? So because there was nothing in the rule that stated when they actually are supposed to be 109 millimeters? Was it before you start or after the race is over? And is that saying that you're going to have tread on it, not have tread on it? So there was a lot of unclear things. Anyway, gluing the inserts is probably the other big, I would say almost more than cutting the inserts, gluing the inserts is probably a bigger performance thing, because like we talked about, even if you run your insert stock and they compress over time, so they do get smaller naturally. But with gluing the inserts, that's something that it's glued from when you start to when you finish, regardless. And that shifting of the insert on the wheel plays a pretty big role in how the car feels when you're driving. And I mean, this goes back to 10 scale again. We used to glue inserts to the wheel. I remember being in the hotel in 1997 with Mark Pavitas, gluing inserts and gluing it to the wheel of 10 scale stadium truck. And the thing that, and at that time we were using 3M spray adhesive to use, like we were using that on traditional open cell foam. They were 2-stage foams. They were 2 different density foams, but they were the open cell material. But it wasn't until Kinwald, he was the first person I ever saw glue a closed cell insert to a wheel. And I was like, he's telling me about this, and I'm like, this works? Like, you can glue this to the wheel? And he's like, yeah, it's great. Like, I'm like, this stays? I'm like, I would just think it would rip right off. And I'm just thinking, once the car's running, I was thinking there's no way that this works. And he would just tack it, and he would just use a dot around each side. And this was 10 scale he was doing it with. Later, obviously went into 8 scale, gluing the inserts. But yeah, I think that was the first guy I saw glue the closed cell inserts, and I was amazed that it didn't fall apart. And just the durable nature of that material was really impressive, that you could glue it like that to a wheel. And sure, it will tear off of there. I mean, if you take them apart and you tear the foam off, but it leaves foam on the wheels. You can see where it tears it, and it actually tears the foam before it breaks the glue, which is kind of interesting. But it's very durable, and you can make a mistake. You can mess it up pretty easily. You could glue the foam where it's down too far, or that's why I think it's good to start off with a little less glue than too much. But yeah, that was a pretty amazing discovery there. And now people use that as a tuning thing, so the foam is not moving on the wheel when you're running. And I think you see it more for high traction tracks, and as opposed to loose tracks. I think the looser the track, and this is a whole nother discussion, but usually the more natural the track is, the more natural the dirt, the more natural the traction, the less all these tricks, I think, are used, which makes it a little more simple. And I actually think a little more like healthy in a sense. All these, I think, tricks and all these changes and all these like kind of tricks of the trade, I think are really cool, and the detailed racers love them. But the more you incorporate all these things, it goes back to what I was saying earlier, where you overcomplicate the whole thing, you intimidate people, and then they say, that's way more effort than I really wanted to put in. I really want to take my car out, have my tires on it, start it on the starter box, and go. And when you start adding all these details and all these things, the detailed person loves it, but I think it really kind of eliminates a certain person that isn't into all that. They just want to drive the car and have fun and all that. And the more of those things that they know they have to do, the more taken back they are from, I think, the thing in general. So because it's more work, and it's really a lot of work. It's not more work; it's a lot more work to do all these things. But some people love it. But I think your general person is like, no, that's like way too much. That's like, my level of commitment here is I take my car out. I might have cleaned it a little bit during the week, and the tires look good. Start it up and go. And that's kind of how they want to compete. And so, but all these things do exist, and they do have their place. But I do think the more natural conditions, the more natural dirt, terrain, all that, the less those tire tricks play a role. And I think it's a little bit easier actually for them.
Cool. And, just to kind of reinforce, when's it better to cut that step off, and when's it better to do a V cut in the foam?
Well, I think it's mostly like if you're running on a track I think it's really kind of two different things. I almost kind of think sometimes the V cut is where you're just trying to soften up the center of the tire, maybe relax the profile on a track where maybe you actually need a little bit more traction or a little more grip or just some drivability a little bit different, versus when you're cutting the whole thing down and you're gluing it. To me, it's for a very purposeful high traction track, smooth conditions. To me, that's where you use that more often.
Okay. Thanks. Okay. That makes a lot of sense, and that should definitely help some of our listeners out on how to prep their tires. And I know there's also sidewall bands, and then there's also bands that go around the foam as well. So when do we use those?
I think the bands that go on top of the insert is more, that's like what you're trying to do is simulate, in a sense, glued foam, gluing the foam, where you're trying to restrict the insert from moving off the wheel. You're really trying to hold it onto the wheel because it's a big part of the flexibility of that whole combination. So I think that the bands are it's kind of like going in the direction of gluing the insert, but not quite all the way. And there was drivers using that at the Worlds. There was drivers that preferred that setup, but I can't really say that one was better than the other. But personally, I think I like the gluing of the inserts a little better than the bands personally, because I think it's a little bit easier and it's one less thing you kind of have to keep up with. And I think it would be nice to be able to just say, hey, I'm either going to glue my inserts or I'm just going to run them without. And I think that's probably the easier method, but there are certainly a lot of people that do like the bands. But I think you can kind of simplify it a little bit to almost down to the two.
Now, is there any time where you either glue or put bands on just the front and not the rear? Is that like
no? I've never really seen people do that. I think in 8 scale, when we used to race, we're race 2-wheel drive buggy. You're always using really a different width front. You're always using it. To me, it was changing your fronts with a 2-wheel buggy seemed like very normal. You would do different things to your fronts than you did the rears. In 8 scale or 4-wheel drive, an 8 scale in particular, because it's the same tire front and rear, it almost seems like nobody likes to do different things with the tires front to rear because, I don't know, maybe it's the same tire or it's 4-wheel drive, but you rarely see people do different things inside the tire or the gluing or all that. Normally what they'll say is if they try it, they'll say something like, yeah, it was okay, but I'm just going to do both. They almost feel weird about doing one end over the other. Like they're just like something, it just doesn't seem right to them to do that. Whereas like on two-wheel buggy, it's totally common that just your fronts can be completely different than your rears, right? It's for some reason 8-scale kind of has that. Not to say that it shouldn't or should, but that's just what I see when we're at the races. And then the other thing we're talking about, like there's the sidewall parts where you can put the sidewall piece into the tire, which is really just to almost make the car easier to drive when you have too much front end feeling in the car, or you want it to maybe go through the bumps differently. They seem to jump a little bit differently. They seem to go through ruts or bumps differently. So, when we first did it, it was mostly because in 10-scale, we were looking to make the front of the two-wheel buggy easier to drive. That was kind of where it came from. And then we're like, well, we might as well make some for 8-scale. And then I remember trying them at the dirt with Adam and Mayfield, and we're watching and they're driving, and it's like there's a lot more kind of happening here than just what we made them for two-wheel drive for. That you started to see all these things happening on the big track with the jumps and the bumpy sections and so yeah, there was definitely there was different things happening with the 8-scale sidewall support versus just the 10-scale ones. There was a little bit more at play in play there with the car, I think.
Okay, cool. Thank you. That's a lot of good information that hopefully, like I said before, our listeners can use. And I know I don't want to take up a lot of your time, but I do have. I could keep going, but I'll ask one more question. And this one's a little bit different. We're going to switch gears here, and this goes out to my buddy Paul Wynn, who I love seeing at all the races. He's such a great guy. I know he helped develop the Bruggy body. Am I correct?
Yeah.
Was he part of that? Yeah. So, now I just became. These guys know I just became a part of Roar on the executive committee, taking over Leanne's position as secretary. So yet to do my first meeting or anything like that. I'm just, novice rookie, wet behind the ears. But what's your take on the Bruggy body, and what would your recommendation to Roar be?
Interestingly enough, this was several months ago. We actually had a meeting with Roar about it, and they, I'd say it was about 15 different people that were in that particular meeting. And at the time, it was kind of just determined that there was going to be no further movement to try to go back to the older style body. Like, I think once everybody kind of got together, there was really very little, if no support to go back to the other style body, because really it had gone too far already. It was, and I think the explanation that I was trying to share, it doesn't make a difference to us which body is, I don't know, working or selling. But what I was explaining to them was it was in their time frame that they wanted to convert back to the older body. It was going to be difficult to have every single truck on the market and have a body that fit every single truck on the market in a year and a half or whatever it was, a year and a half. So, what I was trying to tell them was, if X-Ray decide, just picking a name, if X-Ray decides to have a new truggy, they're not going to give it to us so that we can make a body for the Roar Nationals in a year and a half that fits the truck, that shares the style that they want to go back to. So it's going to be very difficult for us to make sure we have a body for every truck, because nobody wants to give you their newest truck. So, and what I explained about the advantage of the body that we have now, or this, is the same one practically fits on every truck. We actually only sell one. So, and the drivers have been using the same one on different vehicles. So, and I explained to them that you can't really, the problem with the other scenario is we almost had to have a different body for every single truck. So if there was 8 or 9 different brands, we had to have 8 or 9 different bodies because they all fit different, the shock towers, the body mounts. And for us to actually make that, we have to have the truck. And these manufacturers don't want to just give you something that might not be out yet or something down the road. You don't really see a lot of that. So, so after kind of explaining these things, after the other, the manufacturers were in there, that we were talking, it was just kind of like, yeah, this isn't going to happen. And, Techno was essentially explaining that, because what they were trying to say was the look of the truck was the look of the vehicle. Yeah, I don't know if they're a truck or not. The Techno was really touchy about the naming, and I don't blame them. And they were trying to say, well, people aren't getting into this because it doesn't look like a truck. And essentially Techno was like, well, the sales have never been any better than they are right now in the truggy class. So what you're trying to sell to me here isn't really holding any water, because we know all the numbers and it's actually more popular than it ever has been. And they brought in, all the entry numbers from the past nationals and this and that. And it was like, there wasn't enough there to justify really going back to this other style body for one race. That was the other point, was you weren't going to be able to convince somebody that's going to a Race Time Entertainment or the Mugen Challenge. They weren't going to tell everybody they needed to run the Roar approved or specific body. So now you have 2 bodies, right? You have, well, for one race a year, we have to run the body that covers the shocks. And for every other race, you can run any body that you want. So we were, that was the other thing that was part of the discussion. It was like, all right, well, now this is the other part of it. And it got too far, and I think the information went out onto the internet, onto social media, way before it should have. They should have talked to all of us, got all this information first, then decided what they were going to do with, this potential year, nationals a year and a half away or whatever it was. But they kind of ran with it, and it was kind of a mistake, I think, on their end to run with it too quickly. And then they kind of got in a position where they had to just they're going to have to come back at some point, or I don't know if they ever will, and say, well, yeah, that's not actually going to happen. And because what we actually did at the time is Kurt Winger from Associated said, hey, he was the funniest in the meeting. He was just like, look, guys, this is way too far. We are way out of the realm of going back to this other style body. How about we just come up with a dimensional limit on what we can do? And everyone seemed to agree on that. And there was a simple drawing that we got from somebody or Techno. Kurt did it himself. He just put some simple dimensions for things that were out there. Was all presented back to Roar. And eventually, I think what will come of it is you can't be smaller than X dimensions. And I think that was about as far as it went. And it was done. So personally, they've never looked like trucks to me. The buggies really don't look like buggies either to me. But, to me, a buggy was the original RC10. That was based off of a real off-road buggy, or a Tamiya or a Kyosho car. Those were real buggies. But today we just kind of have we have a version of what it has transformed into. And I think at that level of racing, you're kind of past the look. Sure, when you get into this hobby, it's nice. You buy a scale truck, or you buy a monster truck, or you buy some kind of vehicle that's a car or a Mustang. But once you start racing, it seems like these things really morph into something else. And by the time you're hooked so much on the racing and not necessarily the looks, I don't think the majority of the people care how much the buggy looks like the buggy and the truck looks like the truck. Now, if you wanted to start a scale off-road nationals, that would be different. And that's what I recommended, to say, hey, if you guys are so obsessed with the look of these things, create a scale Roar off-road nationals where you only race vehicles that look scale. Then you can have your scale vehicles. There's plenty of them in the market if you want. You can have scale different types of vehicles. Traxxas makes cool ones. There's Arma ones. There's short course. There are trophy trucks. There's things that you could make scale nationals. But anyway, that's kind of where it went. I think we'll end up with a rule book eventually, an update where there's a dimension to the truggy body. But I think they're going to look pretty much like they look now. I don't think anybody's really eliminated from it. And if Techno's right and their sales and everybody sales is up in truggy and the entries have been doing good at the major events, then I don't really see any issue.
Cool. Yeah, I know there was a lot of truggies at this last LCRC event, and definitely gaining popularity. And I love pushing some of the newer customers that are trying to get into the sport, trying to break into racing, where it's a little bit more difficult to get into the truggy segment, because it's a lot less involved with setup. So you can kind of like throw it down, run it. You don't have to worry. It's not so critical if this setup is perfect. Quick question to add in there. Did anybody suggest anything about calling it like 7 scale? I've heard that floating around.
Somebody mentioned that, but I didn't think that it didn't really matter. Like they're just like the techno guys and everyone else. They were, what their point was. They're like, we actually think that our truck body looks more like a truck than the ones that you guys are saying looks like a truck. They're like, we want to argue the fact that ours looks more like a truck. So it got pretty crazy for a while, but overall it ended up okay, I think, and it was pretty beneficial to everybody that was in there to learn, and it was a good time.
Cool. All right, that's awesome. Vin, great additional questions, man. Do you have one left? You almost done? We're gonna try to wrap up.
Yeah, we've gone really long. I don't want to keep Jason up longer than we need to. I do have more questions, but we'll save them for another time.
So Jason,
we can do it again.
Cool. Thank you, sir.
I have one question that Toby Hampson is going to cringe when I ask it.
I'll do it.
You know, it has to be asked. So
Doesn't
might as well
really.
say it. All right, we won't ask the question. It was
Now you
about-
got him curious. Now you have to ask him.
Well, of course. So I'll just it was about colors and fastness, right? 2 colors, but you know,
Go on.
I'm not.
Go on.
Go on. Right.
Yeah, you've
so,
already gone there.
Well, I was
Jason,
trying.
Jason runs White Wheels.
I thought it was only applicable. So what's faster, Jason? White or yellow?
White is faster.
That's what I hear, brother.
So
And if
Alan, you better change your rims.
if you just look at the last, all the worlds since 2013 have been won with white wheels. So,
Dropping facts.
yep,
There we go.
odd facts right there.
I'm
It is official.
the last. It's such a stupid thing, but we always talk about it. But yeah, it's when you actually go back. We did this, or I did this once. I went back and I looked at all the world championships, and it was funny because there's a lot. There's several times where black wheels won the worlds too, because of and either Jay Halsey had them on the front of an RC10, they were black, or Masami was really running black wheels but with wheel dots. So it's like, did fluorescent pink wheels win, or did they were they really black wheels? But it's like it's really the wheel. So it's like, well, they were black wheels, and he's had pink wheels too. Yokomo's back then and RC10 they used to put pink wheels on, and it's funny when you actually went back and looked at all this stuff, and because it's really a joke, right? Obviously, there's
Urban myth of RC.
yeah, but when you went back and looked at this, I was like, man, you know what? I'm like, there's really been a lot more winning on black wheels than I ever thought there would have been, because it's just not a color that you see a lot in RC, right? Like in real racing, there's tons of black wheels, but for some reason in RC, like I don't know if it's because of the dish wheel, or you just can't see the details as well or something. But I mean, I think if real cars ran wheels like RC cars, you would think they would just look crazy, right? Like you think of how big of an 8-scale buggy wheel is. If you had that like on a real car, it would just
32-inch rims.
Yeah, you would just, especially fluorescent yellow, right? You would just think, what is going on with this?
It's almost like the caps on the Tesla. My wife's Tesla has those caps on. I just want to take them off, but it's better MPGs.
Yeah, so it's kind of funny how it all kind of works out. But yeah, I always kind of joke because I've always ran white wheels, so I always say that they're the fastest. So I kept track starting back in 2013, and yeah, so far the white wheels are undefeated at the World since 2013.
All right.
And then to top it all off, and I'm thinking while I'm at the Worlds, our driver Juan Carlos, he's running white wheels the entire time, and I'm just like, okay, that's what he normally runs, right? White wheels. He's got his normal paint job. We come to the semifinals, and he's like, I'm going to run yellow wheels. And I'm like,
don't do it.
I'm like, okay. And people are like, you're not going to talk him out of this? And I'm like, what am I going to say? They're not fast. So
they haven't won since 2013. That's what you tell them.
And I'm thinking, okay, well, what's a better story? The fact that he doesn't win because he runs the yellow wheels, or that he does win and he is using the yellow wheels the first time since 2013 somebody wins with yellow wheels. So, yeah, I was thinking, I couldn't decide what the better story was.
Did he run yellows in the main or whites?
He did. He ran the yellow wheels in the main.
See, he probably used up more fuel, and
Yeah, of course I had people come I had people legitimately coming up to me going, "You're really gonna let him run yellow wheels?" And I'm like, "That's what he asked for. He's asked for the yellow wheels."
Wow.
What
I
a
think,
perfect.
and I think his vision. I haven't asked him, but I think his vision was the Spanish colors are red and yellow. And I think his body was red. And I think he was thinking, I'm going to run the yellow wheels. I'm going to try to win this thing with our, he's from Spain. He's going to go with the Spain colors. And I think that was what he was thinking. He wasn't thinking about white and yellow wheels. He was going for what was, going to be matching for the country and just kind of, it was going to look the part. Right. And, but yeah, I have several people. Are you really going to let him run those wheels? It's
Love
like,
it.
of course, there were people afterwards going, it was the yellow wheels. It was the yellow wheels.
So what a great way to wrap up the podcast, right? A question
Yeah.
none of the panel members wanted me to ask, even though it was already on the pre-list of questions. And it ends up being one of probably the funniest questions that we all get a little bit of laugh about. And to see the connection tied into the world and people saying that to you, perfect. What a way to end the show. If you can do us a favor and just hang in a minute, we're just going to do a little sponsor to EB Mods on the show, and then we're going to wrap it up.
Oh, I am.
Yeah.
I got absolutely nothing prepared for this.
Message you a few times on that.
Oh, you did? I haven't got a.
We could
a
just do it. We could do it verbal. I can do it.
Yeah, I mean, I'll probably mix something when I do the edit. But shout out to Ed Bridges. He's our current sponsor for the podcast, ebmods.com. It's been in the hobby for many years. Northeast guy. I actually went over to see him at cancer race this year to get a sleeve pinched. So he's your main man in Northeast for getting engine maintenance, refreshing, trackside pinching. It also has a web store. You can buy discounted OS engines. He even has developed his own pinching tool, which is very unique in the industry. Yeah, shout out to EB Mods.
Motor break-ins, motor tuning, right, for the top racers in the
All the
area.
good things. Yep.
Yeah. He's got two 2105s I just gave him for AMS. So
and I've seen that logo around for a long time.
Yep.
And so obviously he's doing something right. Still doing it.
Yep.
I just sent him a motor this morning.
Sweet.
Awesome. Yeah, we're working on something else. I'm not going to let the cat out of the bag, but Ed and I have been going back and forth on something. I'll just hint that it's not motor related. It's very cool, though. Very cool. I can't wait. Soon.
Oh, nice, man. Innovation in the hobby.
Yeah, buddy.
Well, Jason, it has been a pleasure, to say the least, to have you come join us. I really love the fact that the podcast didn't go down the road that you've traveled many times with many other interviews. How'd you get in your company? How'd you do this? How'd you get in the position? I think the content that we talked about tonight was really great for not only the average guy coming to our track or the mid-range racer, all the way up to the local pro, somebody like Ethan Mechanic or Jason Schreffler, so on and so forth. I think everybody derives something positive from the interview and the content that we went over. So thank you very much for not only donating your time, but giving us good insight to the hobby. And we really appreciate what you've done from the get-go. Great company that you've created and awesome products. I think there's not one of us here that doesn't have J Concept tires in our bag. So thank you very much.
I appreciate it all. I really appreciate you guys doing all the effort. Obviously I've seen, Vin and probably Toby quite a bit at the races. And I know obviously just Toby, all the work he does on those races at LCRC and trying to keep it live and running up and down. And I mean, it's crazy the amount of work that, that the passionate people will do for this. That's what's kind of special about this RC thing is people work a lot on the passion part of it. And it definitely doesn't go unnoticed. That everybody's got kind of puts their stamp on one way or another of trying to reach more people or help more people, and it's a big part of it.
Well, there's no doubt we'd love to have you back in the future if you ever see fit to come back or have some time, or if you have a new product coming out and you want to share it with our local guys, it would be great. I have to take a moment and ultimately say thank you to Vin Manchenda. Vin knows a lot of people in the industry, and without Vin's connection to yourself tonight, you wouldn't be here. So, Vinny, thank you very much again for leveraging your extensive contacts in our space. So,
right back to Jason for being so willing to come on the show. It really didn't take much at all, and he's I have to say before we wrap up that Jason J Concepts has always supported racers and racing, and I can honestly say from what I've seen, he really cares. It's seldom you see that an owner is so into the sport still and doing it right, and the level of support that we get, not just Paul Wynn, but like even all the other racers sharing input, the group texts, what big events and stuff like that, it really makes a difference. And then the pictures and stuff we get from Hannah and everybody else on the crew, it's just Jason goes above and beyond what anyone else does. Just thank you so much for what you do for the industry and for the support that you give us racers.
Thank you. Yeah, it means a lot. Thank you.
Cool. Well, I'd like to say thank you.
See everywhere, Jason. LCRC, PNB, you're always there.
Yep.
Banner
Made one or two races over the years.
All right, everyone. So this was episode 21 with Jason Rouna from J Concepts Tires. Again, we want to thank him. I want to thank all my other members on the Northeast podcast. And other than that, we will see everyone at the track as soon as possible. We look forward to the next episode coming up. Don't forget, we'd really appreciate it if you could throw us a like, hit the subscribe button, or share with a friend, not only here on Facebook or on YouTube, whichever you prefer, whichever one you're watching, we appreciate it nonetheless. We're just trying to bring more content as the seasons go on. We're going to have a bunch of new interviews coming up over the next few seasons. Me and the guys are going to work on the lineup, send out some invitations, and see who's interested in coming on. But we're definitely going to bring you some good people, good products, and maybe even some other track owner coverage. So we will see you guys all trackside, episode 22 next month. Thanks for watching.